In Colombia, the House of Representatives approved the pension reform promoted by Gustavo Petro's government. In Palestine, the United Nations World Food Program warned of a water and sanitation catastrophe in the southern part of the devastated Gaza Strip. In France, citizens took to the streets of several cities to protest against the far-right national rally ahead of upcoming elections to the French Parliament. Hello, welcome from the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the TeleSur studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Colombia, the House of Representatives approved the pension reform promoted by Gustavo Petro's government. The pension reform was approved with 88 votes in favor. It will now be reviewed before being submitted to the President for its enactment. President Petro explained that this reform seeks to change the pension system, which left close to 3 million elderly people without any type of pension or savings, and to whom a pension bonus of 230,000 pesos per month will be granted. The Colombian head of state also described the approval of the reform as the main social conquest of the country's working people in a long time.
And today we have a pension reform, which was really the objective. I believe that whatever came out of the Senate can be improved in the regulation. Those of us responsible for pushing this pension reform have the obligation to present a bill that modifies whatever went wrong in the Senate's draft.
The reform will come into effect on July 1st, 2025. Let's see its main aspects. The pension reform maintains the retirement age at 57 for women and 62 for men, but extends the system so that everyone can benefit from resources even if they have not contributed enough in salaries. In the case of women, the bill will follow the ruling of the Constitutional Court and reduce the weeks of contribution for women to 1,000 weeks, adding a gender bonus. In general, it will help to get out of extreme poverty, the 3 million elderly men and women who are today outside of any benefit in Colombia. And we stay in Colombia. The President Gustavo Petro canceled his visit to the peace summit on Ukraine for being aligned with the war. The Colombian president pointed out that the Russian-Ukraine conflict can't be solved with the participation of both countries. Furthermore, the head of state indicated that most of Latin American government of Colombia do not agree with extending the war. Meanwhile, Petro stressed that it is important to establish a security zone without nuclear weapons that physically separates NATO from Russia and allows the security of former Soviet nations and Eastern Europe, the respect of the Russian peoples. In addition, the president summarized that while the world is approaching a global conflagration with time running out to solve the climate crisis, nations have dedicated themselves to war.
What we have found in relation to the peace conference, in quotation marks, in Switzerland, is that it is basically in alignment to the side of war, and we do not agree with that. That is why I have decided to suspend my visit. We are willing to participate in conferences that are freely dedicated to seeking the paths to peace and not to building blocks for war.
In Venezuela, the Arismendi Community Socialist Mission base was inaugurated Saturday in the renowned Caracas parish of Antimano. Executive Vice President Desi Rodriguez was accompanied by Mayor Carmen Melendez and the national head of the Great Young Venezuela Mission, Genesis Carbat. During her visit, the Executive Vice President emphasized that thanks to the Hugo Chavez Equality Mission, the recovery of these facilities was achieved in order to put them at the service of the people. Carbat also detailed that the structure has spaces destined to the formation of the younger generations. The Non-Aligned Movement and the G77 Group plus China, through their joint coordinating committee, are pushing for Cuba to be taken out of the list of countries that allegedly sponsor terrorism. In a statement issued on Friday, June 14th, the Non-Aligned Movement and the G77 plus China denounced the inclusion of Cuba in the list by the U.S. State Department on countries that sponsor terrorism as unjust and unfounded, which only serves as a pretext for imposing additional unilateral coercive measures against Cuba by taking the economic, commercial, and financial blockade against the island to an unprecedented level. The non-aligned movement and the G77 plus China declaration urges for strict compliance with the 31 resolutions passed at the United Nations General Assembly on the necessity to end the U.S. blockade against Cuba, and they call on the U.S. government to end its over 6 decades-old blockade on Cuba, for it hinders Cuba's economic development. The group of 77 plus China is made up of 134 states, while the non-aligned movement brings together 121 member states and 18 observers. The Simon Bolivar training ship of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela arrived on Saturday in Santiago de Cuba, in a visit that takes place within the framework of the 34th training cruise abroad in 2024. The Venezuelan ship will remain in the Greater Antilles from this Saturday, June 15th to Wednesday, June 19th, and may be visited by citizens from Sunday 16th to Thursday 18th from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. local time. It will then continue its journey to the city of Santa Marta in Colombia and Wilmstad, Curaçao, to end its trip in the Venezuelan port of La Guaira on July 13th. According to the Venezuelan Ministry of People's Power for Defense, the 34th training cruise abroad will last approximately 3 months, during which it will sail from some 4,500 nautical miles and visit several Caribbean and Latin American ports.
Venezuela, the Venezuelan people with the revolutionary conscience, in spite of sailing in turbulent waters. As a result of the unilateral coercive measures imposed on us by the United States and its allies, Venezuela will arrive safely to port, in victory, in battle. In struggle, under the leadership of our President Nicolas Maduro, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces.
We are ambassadors wherever we go, always projecting the message of union and fraternity when we talk about peace. We are talking about the absence of war. We are talking about respect for each other's identity, to carry the message as such. In addition to it is part of the Bolivarian diplomacy under the strategic guidelines of the state of the Bolivarian Revolution, and we are the platform instruments to bring to the different ports where we arrive.
Let's now take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at TeleSur English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back. The United Nations World Food Programme warned of a water and sanitation catastrophe in the southern part of the devastated Gaza Strip. WFP Deputy Executive Director Carl Scow said his main concern is the 1 million displaced people in Rafah and the situation around the overcrowded refugee camps. Palestinians face widespread hunger because the war has largely cut off the flow of food, medicine, and other supplies. According to the UN, more than 1 million people in Gaza could experience the highest level of famine by mid-July.
Main concern coming out is really what's happening in the south, with the hundreds of thousands, up to 1 million of people who have been displaced out of Rafah, who is now stuck in a very crammed space between Rafah or Khan Yunis and on the beach in Deir el-Bala. I mean, here we have really a protection disaster and a water and sanitation catastrophe. People are camping on the streets, on the beach, at best with some piece of shelter. But we were driving through rivers of sewage. It's just a terrible, terrible situation.
The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees announced that more than 50,000 children in the Gaza Strip need urgent treatment for acute malnutrition. According to the International Police Agency, humanitarian conditions and the suffering of citizens in the Gaza Strip are worsening by day due to the continuing blockade by Israeli forces, which has stopped the flow of humanitarian aid and medical supplies. This blockade has also prevented thousands of patients and wounded from traveling abroad to receive necessary medical treatment. According to UNRWA, the people of Gaza are facing desperate levels of hunger as restrictions on aid continue. The agency said its teams are working tirelessly to deliver aid to families in what it described as a catastrophic situation. The World Health Organization says recent attacks by Israeli occupation forces in the occupied West Bank are damaging healthcare infrastructure and hindering access to medical facilities. WHO officials have expressed concern about the recent escalation of violence and the ensuing health crisis in the region, as well as the arrest of health workers and patients. The agency has called for the active protection of civilians and health workers following some 480 attacks on the healthcare system in the West Bank. Since the start of the attacks on the Gaza Strip, WHO has counted an estimated 521 Palestinians killed in the occupied West Bank, including 126 children and over 5,200 people injured. Human rights organizations in Palestine accuse Israeli forces of targeting journalists in the Gaza Strip. Human rights organizations have issued a statement saying Israel is responsible for crimes and violations against journalists, reporting on crimes committed by Israel in the Gaza Strip since October 7th. According to the statement, 150 journalists and other media employees have been killed during airstrikes perpetrated by Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, Palestinian Journalists Union denounces that the media professionals in Gaza keep exposing Israeli crimes despite the risk and sacrifices involved. On Sunday, Arab and Islamic countries celebrate the first day of Eid al-Adha, also known as the Feast of the Lamb. This celebration is characterized by the sacrifice of animals such as cows, sheep, or lambs, whose meat is offered in sacrifice to God and part of it is distributed to the population. However, this year it cannot be celebrated in Gaza due to Israel's genocidal operation unleashed there. Our TeleSur correspondent, Huda Hegazi, has the details.
Tomorrow, the Arab and Islamic countries celebrate the first day of Eid al-Adha, also called the Feast of the Lamb, a celebration in which an animal is slaughtered, whether a calf, a cow, a sheep, as an offering to God, and also to have its meats distributed to the poor people, among the poor. No. And also to distribute its meat amongst the poor. But this year, here in the Gaza Strip, this celebration and these religious acts cannot be performed because since the beginning of this war, no livestock has entered the Gaza Strip. And right now, I am in one of the farms that previously, every year, was full of cattle. And this year, you can see that literally there's barely any cattle left. A few sheep, goats, and very few cows or even cows. In previous years, these farms were full of livestock, but this year, however, there's only a few cattle left, and the animals that you see were here already by the start of the war. As the man running this farm tells us, since the start of the war, no new livestock has entered the Gaza Strip. And the amount of cattle here represents only 2% of what was found in previous years. The price of meat has increased 20 times. Before the war, you could find a kilo of meat for $5. Now it's more than $25 per kilo. That's why very few animals are slaughtered these days, because the people in Gaza cannot afford to buy meat at such prices. Now we will talk to the owner of the farm so that he may describe what the slaughtering season this year would look like, considering that no livestock has come into the Gaza Strip since the Israeli war began. Hi, I'd like you to tell me what's the atmosphere for this festivity, whether there is enough cattle to be slaughtered.
This year there are no animals for slaughter. The percentage of livestock is minimal compared to the siege and the closing of the borders. why no livestock has entered for slaughter. The prices have also risen a lot, almost 5 or 10 to the previous year, and therefore people can no longer afford to buy them.
As the owner of the farm has told us, this year there's no festive atmosphere. There will be no slaughtering or distribution of meat. So the people in Gaza will be the first to resent this because many poor people are counting on this day to get some meat to feed their children and their families. This year they won't be able to get such portion of meat because of the Israeli war that has been going on for over 9 consecutive months here in the Gaza Strip.
We now have a fun short break coming up, but before we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience. You can scan the QR code on screen to join directly and share the link to reach more people. Constant news coverage of Latin American and Caribbean as well as the rest of the world. Stay connected and informed with TeleSur. Fun short break, don't go away. Welcome back. In France, citizens took to the streets of several cities to protest against the far-right national rally ahead of upcoming elections to the French Parliament. Following the national rally surge in last Sunday's European elections, labor unions, student groups, and rights groups called for rallies to oppose the anti-immigration Eurosceptic party. At least 150 marches were expected in cities including Marseille, Toulouse, Lyon, and Lille. Protesters consider the far-right's victory as a danger to European democracy, while stressing the need for urgent responses in France, social and environmental matters, as well as to the aspirations of its workers.
I was very scared at the start of the week on Monday, Tuesday, etc. And progressively this week, I see what's happening. It's hope that's rising. What I see is a left that is in charge, in fact one that is capable of putting differences aside to agree on the essentials of coming together. And that was truly the case today, when I received more hope than fear.
Peter Pellegrini took office as Slovakian head of state on Saturday with a call for unity and an end to the polarization in the country, which erupted a month ago with the assassination attempt on Prime Minister Robert Fico. Pellegrini takes the oath of office before the members of parliament in Reduta during the ceremony at the Slovak Philharmonic. During his speech, he called for seeking ways to move forward in union and expressed his aspirations to contribute to uniting Slovakia. Fico was shot last May 15th by a pensioner who declared to be against his policies after weeks of massive protests encouraged by the liberal and pro-European opposition against several of the measures of the executive of left-wing populists and ultranationalists formed last October. With regard to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, Pellegrini is betting on a peace agreement.
We must be sure that we will do everything to achieve peace and never allow further expansion of military conflict beyond our borders. After all, the desire for peace is natural and certainly not a celebration of the aggressor.
Musíme ten múr spoločne zbúrať. Musíme mať istotu, že spravíme všetko pre dosiahnutie
Slovakia was and will remain a solid part of the European Union and the North Atlantic Alliance, but it will never be afraid to speak its sovereign voice from within them.
A určite nie je oslavou.
In Russia, authorities confirmed the discovery of 4 corpses found under the rubble of a building that was shelled by Ukrainian Armed Forces missiles. The Ministry of Emergency Situations of Russia indicated that the building was located in the city of Shebekino, in the Russian province of Belgorod, where 7 people were also injured. According to the authorities, about 380 specialists of emergency services and about 50 units of technical equipment took part in the rescue work. The official Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov expressed his complete rejection of this aggression and pointed out that the Ukrainian army continues indiscriminate shelling of civilian infrastructure. In North Korea, the government rejected accusations made before the UN Security Council of the United Nations for alleged human rights violations. The North Korean Foreign Deputy Minister in charge of international organizations, Kim Song-yeong, says such accusations are part of a brutal and intriguing campaign to tarnish the image of North Korea, where it is impossible to subdue it by military means. The North Korean officials said that this is a campaign orchestrated by the U.S. government using the United Nations and other international organizations as instruments, which erodes the prestige of said organizations. Kim Jong-un said his country's priority is and will continue to be to defend the right to life of its citizens against the threats and aggressions of Washington and its allies. In Panama, the National Civil Protection System has issued a yellow alert due to heavy rains across the country. The Meteorology and Hydrology Institute says that strong winds coming from the south are causing changes in maritime conditions, with an increased risk of floods and landslides. The National Emergency Cooperation Center is closely monitoring weather conditions, with emphasis on vulnerable areas. In Singapore, Sentosa Island beaches were closed on Saturday following an oil spill that spread from a port terminal to the Sentosa Island shores. The oil spill originated at a terminal located less than 10 kilometers from the Sentosa Resort Island, after a ship and a dredger collided on Friday, June 14th in the afternoon. According to official reports, 16 vessels have been deployed to contain the oil spill and to start the cleaning and collection of the crude oil. Authorities say they closed the beach area to facilitate the cleanup operation and to protect residents. Like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. Also join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For Telesur English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thanks for watching.